We's live, huh?
We are live.
What a great day in America today, boy.
Why do you find it a great day, Leroy Helm?
Well, it's very interesting. I was having this conversation today, and I was talking to one of the gentlemen who we work with, and I was saying how in Plato's Republic, Plato argued that some members of the Republic believed that righteousness was doing well for yourself and your friends. Mm-hmm. That's what they viewed as righteousness. You might be familiar with this topic. Mm-hmm. And
yeah,
Plato's argument against that view of righteousness was that ultimately it will destroy the nation. The nation will never be able to proceed and be cohesive. So Plato forwarded another view of righteousness, which was the rule of law. In other words,
yeah, we talked about that in the ethics club. Remember we did that?
Well, see, that's why I was going to see how I did that. See how I did that?
That's nice.
So then,
pretending like I didn't know.
Yeah, I know. So then, what was interesting is Plato argued for the rule of law, which was that righteousness is that there's a feature of righteousness called justice, which means that we give to the person what's due them. We render to the person that's due them.
Yeah.
And righteousness isn't doing well for you and to benefit you and your friends. It's to benefit the entire country. Well, it seems to me that one, or at least fragments in the country, think that righteousness is doing well for ourselves and those people who benefit us. And I think that's the real struggle that we're having, is that you have different factions that are attempting to do good, not for the country, but for themselves and those people who put, money in their pockets. And anytime that we get the possibility of putting people in positions of power and to make decisions that will not merely seek to do well by themselves, but will seek to do well by everyone. Not to say that anybody's perfect. I think that's a great day. And removing people from the bench, and when people retire from the bench or whatever.
What about the Supreme Court?
US Supreme Court. You can say that.
Yeah.
There's a possibility. There's a possibility of good things to happen.
One thought on that, and I think this will come out later. I had some quotes from actually the Supreme Court case that came down today.
Was this Janice?
We'll get to today. But, doing not just good for yourself, as you say, but for others. And then we also have to weigh that value towards the collective. Like, are we doing good for groups or individuals who make up groups? And there's a distinction that I think is it's not being missed. It's a very important distinction that's intentional. And how completely different worldview versus a Christian worldview versus a very secular, non-Christian worldview of how we see value and how we get there. And it kind of comes out in this decision I was reading through on the one that came out today on the Supreme Court, where they decided for unions, the government union stuff, and
another great decision.
Another great decision. The court's opinion versus the dissent from Kagan. You see, actually, that view of play. It's really interesting. So, before we get into that, though, did you want to say anything? Because I know you were excited earlier. You called me even earlier and I'm excited about today. It's a good day in America. About the case and then the retirement
Here's what you wrestle with. I mean, if you're a thinking person, I think you wrestle with the fact that there are people that are Christians in the country and there are non-Christians in the country. And Christians don't want a theocracy, regardless of what the non-Christians say. And even what some Christians say, we don't want a theocracy in effect where we want a theocracy, but we want one when God comes back.
Yeah.
When the Lord comes back. We don't want a human instituted theocracy.
We want U.S. democracy run as a theocracy.
We don't want that at all. What we want is a place where people can be the most free within reason and where there's the rule of law and people can grow and prosper in a place like that. But you have this mindset where some people's, their whole desire is the absolute pursuit of power and how they can bend other people to their will. And, I was going to say the wrestling part is in a country like ours, I've always looked at it like this. If a person is gay or whatever, they have every right to go to the ballot box and vote for their particular views. They absolutely do. I mean, and we should applaud them that they do that. They are willing to take part of the democracy and go to the ballot box and legally stuff the voting ballot box for their views. And if we lose, we should go back home, lick our wounds, figure out what we did wrong, and then go back to the ballot box if we can and get the laws changed. That's what happens in a democracy. And whenever that can be affirmed, I think that's a great thing. And then when we have today where there's been some cases where you've seen where people are attempting to force people to do things that are against their deeply held religious and moral beliefs, and then to be able to drag that to court in hopes of forcing people to do those sorts of things, I think is ridiculous. And then you have the opportunity today to put someone who will interpret the Constitution according to the Constitution as if it is not a living document that changes when the people change, but a collection, if you will, of truths to be interpreted.
It's certainly, it's not a living document, but it is a malleable document. It is.
And
it is shaped because you can have amendments, you can have additions.
Right. That's right.
So each of those historic things have meaning. That's what they mean by living, is that you can make it mean whatever we want to mean. We don't. No, it has meaning in context, but it is meant to be malleable. You can change it, if through the right process.
Through the right process.
So it's a big day in terms of Supreme Court decisions. I know this case that we mentioned a minute ago, which is just really referred to about the premise of the case. It's called the Janus versus American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees Council. Basically, it's the unions, the federalized unions.
Mm-hmm.
They have authority or the right to. You want to check online, see what
I'm
we
checking
got
to see
going
if
on there?
anybody said go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So we can check that while I'm doing this. But that case came down, and I think it's probably one of the most significant cases in some time. I know others get bigger press. This will get a lot today. I haven't had a chance to listen to except for about 10 minutes on the radio coming in, which is how I knew the case came down. But so outside of that, I just read through the case and the decision and the analysis of the court, which is called the syllabus. They just give the outline and then they give the opinion and the dissent. And there's a couple quotes that I thought I'd share about this case that I think are significant, not just for what it does to U.S. politics, but it shows a very different view of why these justices interpret the same stuff very differently. And it's a fundamental difference in their worldview that has a lot of real-world implications. So the syllabus of this case, just so you know, is actually heard on February 26th. It was just decided June 27th. The syllabus, that is the summary of the case, says this: forcing free and independent individuals. That phrase is key there. Free and independent individuals. And we'll see how that phrase is changed depending on a worldview in Kagan's thing. So that's why I highlighted that. Anyways, forcing these free and independent individuals to endorse ideas they find objectionable raises serious First Amendment concerns.
Who'd have thunk it?
So, but that's important. Even just that phrase by itself, it sounds like a throwaway. Like, we all agree on that. Because everyone uses that same language, but how they interpret this idea of individuality and First Amendment rights is really what it comes down to. So, in the opinion of the court from Justice Alito, he says this: compelling individuals to mouth support for views they find objectionable violates that cardinal constitutional command, and in most contexts, any such effort would be universally condemned. Suppose, for example, he writes, that the state of Illinois required all residents to sign a document expressing support for a particular set of positions on controversial public issues, say the platform of one of the major political parties. No one, we trust, would seriously argue that the First Amendment permits this. So his example is just like, hey, if you live in this state of Illinois, you have to sign the Republican platform. You have to sign the Democrat or the Independent or the Green Party platform. You have to agree to this to be a resident of the state and to work in this state or have a job in this state. He would say that would be ridiculous. That would be a clear violation.
Who would do such a thing?
And that's what he's saying is the case with when you have a government union, which is different than private unions. But when the government union forces people to take their dues and then it goes to one particular party or any particular party, it doesn't really matter, to any party.
Right.
And that individual disagrees with where that money is going, But they have no choice. If they work for the government, they have to support that political platform with their money. He's saying that's illegal. A violation of the First Amendment.
Sure.
Which makes sense, right? I mean, because again, this idea of free individuals. He goes on to say this: when speech is compelled, however additional damage is done. So this is his second point. So additional damage is done. In that situation, individuals are coerced into betraying their convictions. Again, this idea of individuality comes out again strongly in his opinion. So individuals are coerced into betraying their convictions, forcing free and independent individuals, there's that phrase again, to endorse ideas they find objectionable is always demeaning, and for this reason, one of our landmark free speech cases said that a law commanding, quote, involuntary affirmation of objected to beliefs would require, quote again, even more immediate and urgent grounds than a law demanding silence. So he's quoting from previous precedent in the Supreme Court, saying, look, it is demeaning to the nature of the individual to force them, to compel them to speak. It's even worse than silencing them, and is what the Supreme Court has ruled in the past. So he's saying that's the significance there. I think that's not just fascinating, but the foundation for that, think about it, is the meaning to the individual's nature, to who they are as an individual, to force them, to compel them to speak for something they
do not support.
They do not support.
And that's, I think when we look at the history of the two particular parties that we have today, the thrust of the one party is always compelling people to agree. I'm not saying, I mean, it's hard for me to be not biased in this view. I'm just being honest. It's hard for me to not be biased. But when you look at the whole sweep of history, this one party has just been dragging people to their view, in chains even. So.
Talk about the Democrats.
Well, that's exactly right.
Just to be, as you're framing the idea, I mean, if people have never listened to stuff before, this is not a pro-Republican,
it's not a pro-Republican,
anti-Democrat
no, not at all.
show, and what we do, what we're talking about.
I want to be.
I think both parties have their own shape of corruption.
Yeah,
we've been equally critical of Trump for his foolishness, and for others in the Democratic side for theirs. So this is not a pro. Your statement is not.
It's not
pro-Republican.
You're
saying here's a flaw within the Democrat worldview itself, and the way they platform.
Right. So let me just be, when I think of all the ills in society, and particularly, I mean, if you're black in America, all the ills are not evenly spread across the ledger. They're just absolutely not. They're not spread across the ledger. They're on one side of the ledger, and there doesn't mean that there are none on the other side.
I'm going to bring up a quote in a minute that's going to make you go nuts. But anyway, keep going.
But they're 99% on one side of the ledger, and there's never been an apology. There's never been a my fault or a my bad from those people. It's always been more compelling people to believe and to do things against their will. And I just think that that's ridiculous. And I think that we ought to be able to say that and see that.
So I was listening to a podcast. It was a speech, and I won't even say what group this was from, but this is from one of the largest evangelical, quote-unquote, denominations in the United States.
I can guess which one it is.
I don't even want to say because I don't want to
No, that's fine. No, we don't need to.
But this individual who is a pastor of a very large church, I'll say it's out of Texas. I mean, that's not going to narrow because there's a mega church at every block. Throw a rock, you'll hit a mega church, So this guy, pastors a very large church in Texas. And he was asked to speak on the problem with white evangelicals. And so this guy was a very high leadership voice in this particular denominational group, and very well known, was giving his little thing. And then I didn't disagree with everything he said. I think there were some valid points he made, and in terms of people, being careful that they don't surround themselves with just all these agreeing voices and stuff like this. But I almost said I should have sent you. I was going to send you the clip. But I'm like, no, I don't want to get Leroy too mad. But here's what this guy said this at one point, and it ties into this little thing you're saying about, always wanting people to say a certain thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because on the Christian side, outside of the Democratic Party, but as a Christian side, we've bought into some of that in this sense. He said that, if you are, he's like, I'm going to speak to my white evangelical pastor friends, which I know already irritates all of us in the sense of there's white Christians and black Christians.
Oh my gosh.
As if white and black is the primary, the essential quality of our identity as opposed to Christian.
Sure. And
the skin color somehow is now this defining characteristic that we can't
get past.
Yeah. So anyway, aside from that, he said that to my, white evangelical pastor dudes, he's like, don't just find the one black person who agrees with you on things. He said, just to make things comfortable. He said, and that's not even the egregious part. I said, okay, that makes sense. You don't want to just find people. But he said, because they are probably just agreeing with you because out of feeling pressure to be accepted or whatever. This came in the context of him saying, we don't want to be, patriarchal to whites should be patriarchal to blacks, like, oh, we're here, you're a child, you can't understand deep thought or deep things. Mm-hmm. So in the sense of like, hey, everyone has their own independent thoughts, he essentially is saying that if you have a black man who agrees with you, it's probably because he's not really an independent thinking black man.
Right.
He's being forced into that because he wants to be accepted. And I know you've gotten that from other people. It just drove me nuts because all this guy has done is spiritualized the lie that there's one right black way to think. Mm-hmm. And if you don't think the black way, you're not a real, genuine, independent black guy. And
it's an insane.
I know that ruffles you, but it's the same kind of thing.
It's the same kind of thing.
That's what the Democrats used to like, hey, you have to think this way to be part of us, but the Christian side has done that as well.
I have a cousin back in Philadelphia who I talk to just about every day, and he is as far left as left can be, but we've argued back and forth, and I said to him, I know you think that I hate black people. I said, because I don't intone.
You said that to him. He thinks you hate black people.
I said, I know that you think that because of how you hear me talk. But I said, we have two competing visions for what we believe about, let's say, black men, for example. We have two competing visions. I think that black men need to be free. I think they need to be gainfully employed. I think they need to have their own voice. I think that they don't need to depend on other people. I think that they need to be able to go out into the world and make their way without other people having to pave the road for them. That isn't to say that we don't all need some help. We all do. Everybody needs some sort of benefactor everywhere. But we do not need other people to define ourselves by. And I said, I'll take a dozen black guys like that over those who think that our only success can come at the hands of someone else. And I said, I want black men to be successful, for example. I want the black family to be successful. And I want it to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. I don't think that we need to depend on this political party or that political party in order for us to be successful. I just don't think that.
Especially when any party says, and the way to help you is that you have to toe the party line. You have to say what we say is the right thing. And if you step off outside of that, you somehow are betraying.
You just think of the heroes. You just think of the heroes that we're not allowed to celebrate Clarence Thomas. We're not allowed to celebrate Condoleezza Rice. We're not allowed to celebrate Ben Carson, the greatest brain surgeon in the history of the planet. We're not allowed to celebrate any of these heroes because they are not ideologically bound to this defeatist, victimist, losingist, worldview. And I'm sorry. It is exactly what it is. And if that means that I hate black people, then golly, call me a hater, because I'm gonna keep that view.
Yeah, and I think that's the tie into this case and the Supreme Court thing. Even though the issues are very different. Right. I mean, one is about unions and compelled speech.
It's about freedom.
But the other, because it fundamentally comes down to a view of the individual. Mm-hmm. Does the individual have the right to free speech, or does the group have a right to free speech? Mm-hmm. Who does that right go to? And don't kick that desk because I don't make a noise on the mic. I'm just warning you.
All right. Sorry.
I'll forgive you.
I almost said something else.
I'm glad you felt it. I'm glad you felt it. Oh my goodness.
That would have been so funny.
We're going to have to go and edit this tape out. Even though it's live, we'll find a way to do that.
Oh my God.
Let's look at Kagan's dissent.
Oh,
because I want to put a bow on this and like tie this together because there's a place to get to in this.
Yeah.
Because I think it doesn't matter if it's a secular Democrat or even now, I think within very strong movements within Christian, quote unquote, evangelical circles, whatever that means.
Yeah.
They are finding, hey, the way that we can, attract
black people,
people outside
is pandering,
is by adopting the worldview and
sick.
spiritualizing that worldview. And ultimately what they're doing, they don't realize it, or maybe they do, I don't know, is they're accepting their view of individuality.
That's right.
That is very different from a Christian worldview. Here's what Kagan says in her dissent. Now, this is going to be hard to unpack, and I want to get your thoughts on this, because I've read it quite a few times, and I know what she's saying, but it's stated so well that you really have to look at the words compared to what Alito is saying to understand what she's driving at. She says this: Americans have debated the pros and cons for many decades. That is of taking union dues and supporting what the whole case is about. So forcing, taking union dues, people have to give them and do that. She said, in large part, by deciding whether to use fair share arrangements.
What does she mean by fair?
Well, she just means by that whether, if you're a part of this teachers union, for example. Okay, teachers union is a government union because the schools are run by the government.
Right.
You're required as a teacher to be a part of my union. And if you get the benefit of the teacher contract, if you get the benefit of the days off and the sick pay, all that stuff, then you have to pay your fair share in dues because you're reaping the benefit of that.
Right.
And so, yes, some of that goes to political speech, but that's what guarantees you your benefits that you receive. So you have to pay your fair share. That's what she's calling fair share. Good question, though. So they've been deciding whether to use fair share arrangements. Yesterday, 22 states, she's saying before this case was decided, 22 states were on one side. That is that, supporting teachers unions and the unions had the right to collect these dues. 28 on the other. And she says, quote, or parenthetically, ignoring a couple of in-betweeners, so there's some in-between states. Today,
it's only 50.
That healthy, she's saying, so that there's split. So, you get District of Columbia and Puerto Rico that get to decide, even though they don't have certain voting, but they're still part of that whole process. So she says, today that healthy, which she describes healthy, that democratic debate ends. So she's saying this decision by the Supreme Court, the opinion that won here in that 5-4 decision, is ending democratic debate. It's destroying democracy.
That's a slick move on her part.
Maybe most alarming, the majority has chosen the winners by turning the First Amendment into a sword and using it against workaday economic and regulatory policy. So she's saying they're using the First Amendment to take a hatchet, to destroy, take a sword and cut away the value of regulatory local politics, state politics, and all this other kind of stuff. She's saying they're using that to destroy that. She concludes this. So the majority's road runs long. And she gave a bunch of examples prior to this, how, all kinds of examples of where does it end? It's a sort of she makes this slippery slope argument. If this is it, then everything becomes subject to the First Amendment because nobody can do anything and no one will have any rights to pass any laws, and we'll run into anarchy, essentially, is the problem, because First Amendment will run roughshod over everything. She says this, so the road runs long, and at every stop are black-robed rulers overriding citizens' choices. So she's saying the majority of the Supreme Court has overridden citizens' choice. The First Amendment was meant for better things. It was meant not to undermine, but to protect democratic governance. That's the key here. The First Amendment was meant not to undermine, but to protect democratic governance, including over the role of public sector unions. So here's what I take away from this, and you can jump in with your thoughts in a second. This is what you have to unpack. Because it sounds very good. Like she's saying, oh my goodness, this is violating individual rights. That's not what she's actually arguing. Mm-mm. What she's saying is the majority in this case has used the First Amendment, which is, according to the opinion, talking about keeping individuals free and protecting their liberty as individuals. She's saying, no, it's not protecting the liberty of individuals. It's the First Amendment was meant to protect democracies, the democracy itself.
So she's elevating the state over the individual. That's exactly right.
That's exactly right.
Right.
She thinks the First Amendment applies to democracy.
State. But that's because of her worldview.
That's exactly right. Here's the problem is the irony. This is why it's hard to discern her statement. It makes almost no sense.
She's very
she's saying the majority is wrong by taking on the majority of opinion. They're forcing it on the other people who she thinks should be the majority, and that's the thing. So she's picking her majorities of which state majority
she's picking and choosing as well.
But the reality is the way you can untangle the mess she sort of creates there is to recognize what she's saying is the First Amendment right to free speech is meant to protect democracy, not the liberty of the individual. As opposed to that's the real crux of where this difference is between these two sides are. The majority opinion and the dissenting opinion. It's about a worldview of who has rights, the individual or the group.
And it goes to this point when we talk about Supreme Court justices, it goes to the fundamental nature of our relationship to the law. I remember reading I believe it was Locke's second treatise on law. I think it's second treatise on law. And if you ever read it, one of the main points that he makes is that men come together to protect their valuables. The main reason that we come together is to protect our valuables. And we protect those valuables by making a law, making it illegal to take another man's valuable. So if I remember correctly, on one side there's this right to be able to say what you want.
Yeah.
And then there's a right to have the things that you own protected from other people coming and taking them. That's why we come together. Those things only have value insofar as the individual has value. Those are the forming ideas through which and by which we made these documents that have held us and kept us together. What happens when you elect someone with a different perspective, one that thinks that the state is the thing that is to outlive and outlast? That's totally Stalinist in this sense. Stalin believed that the state, that individuals mattered nothing at all. I am free to kill 70 million people, 35 million people, no matter what, as long as the state exists. Another way of looking at this was if you look at Lycurgus's Sparta. Lycurgus believed that the state got to decide.
Dropping all the names today.
I know.
You've been reading some books.
I'm reading some books. Well, I go to school here. I go to the school here.
You're losing all your street.
We have this. I know. We have all these smart people that teach us stuff here. But Lycurgus argued that the state got to decide what you did with your children.
Yeah.
They got to decide when you could have birth. They got to decide what house you could live in, what you could do and what you couldn't do. And these people, and the people were chattel. They were chattel. They weren't of value.
This is
because the state was supposed to outlive all these things.
This is where this bridge between what Kagan is arguing here, and the thing you talk about the Democrats in the sense of forcing people, you have to have this position, and certain Christians now saying if you have to make friends with black folk that disagree with you, meaning if they agree with you, it's probably because they're just agreeing with white thinking as opposed to black. It's forcing people by race into categories.
Right.
Black thinking is one thing, white thinking is another thing. Mm-hmm. And if you go outside of that, it's because you're betraying some sort of racial identity that's supposed to be determinative of how you think and process information. But all of those things, the confluence is it's putting people in a collective. It's a collectivist mentality. That's the difference between what happened today in the Supreme Court between the majority opinion and the dissenting opinion.
It is. Look, there's a guy, and I recommend that you watch these two videos if you're listening. There's a guy named Stephen Kotkin. He has 2-hour-long videos and he's written a 3-volume work on Stalin. But he's got 2 videos that he's done with the Hoover. What is that called? Hoover Foundation.
Hoover Institute.
Hoover Institute.
Yeah.
That you should go on YouTube and watch. And he talks about the relationship between capitalism and collectivism. How Stalin represented the collectivist in the city, while the countryside were all capitalists, because the countryside is where all the money was. That's where all the farmers were. And how, in order to get the countryside to become socialist, they had to crush and destroy them. And, they did. And millions of people died, were killed, sent to the Gulag, sent to Siberia, and murdered. And if you don't believe that this can happen here in America, you just keep electing socialists. I learned a long time ago, you better start listening to people when they make statements and when their actions are in alignment with their statements. And what you find on that one side is that their actions consistently constrain, compel, and enforce people, harass people, because they don't believe in the strength of ideas. They don't believe in truth. They don't believe in justice. Well, they do believe in the justice, but it's not really the justice that is in accordance with the will of God. I think the righteousness that we find in Scripture, it's a justice that seeks to make everybody equal. And that's not justice. Justice is not making everybody equal. Justice is not making Michael Jordan at his height play basketball like Leroy Hill. That's not justice.
He would not be good enough.
He would not be good enough. Exactly.
That's right.
We
don't want to bring him down.
Justice is not making LeBron play like
a winner.
LeBron is the greatest second place finisher in the history of the planet.
He's number 1 and being number 2.
Exactly. But that's not justice.
Cleveland.
That's not justice. That's not justice. Justice is letting LeBron be LeBron. It's letting Michael be Michael. It's letting me be me. And these people, and I say these people, they are enslaved to this idea that says that not equal opportunity, but equal outcomes. Let me
quote again, like from Kagan's dissent here, and take all that and apply it again to this, because I don't think this can be overemphasized enough, because it takes a bit to deconstruct here. Mm-hmm. She says this, this opinion of the Supreme Court is that they've made. She said at every step are black robe rulers overriding citizens' choices, which sounds like she's offering the individual. She's for the individual.
No.
But she's not. She said, because she says the First Amendment was meant for better things, it was meant not to undermine, protect democratic governments.
What she's saying is very deep. It's very deep.
What she's saying is that this idea that they have, that the individual has freedom to have their own political expression, undermines the right of the majority of the citizens to vote in a law that binds all of us into a collective opinion of what should happen. Because that's what, notice how she says, she doesn't say individuals, she says citizens. So she's not talking about individuals. She's saying this. Here's the cases. If the majority of citizens voted, yes, we want teachers unions to, exist, and we want all the teachers unions to collect dues, then whatever that union says, because it was the majority decision, should have the right, because that was a democratic elected, decision, to override the individual who may not want to be forced into saying those things. Because again, she's saying the First Amendment is protecting the collective, the state's rights, the democracy, not the individual, which is flawed for varieties too. Because first, we're not a democracy; we're a constitutional republic,
right?
Not a democracy. So it's the wrong use of democracy and what that means. But that's to see that subtle wordplay of how she's doing that. So this again is that other issue. Leroy Hill, you as a black man, Joe Miller as a white man, I can't go outside of what the collective says I'm supposed to say, because then I'm violating that sort of democratic ideal of this is what truth is. Everything needs to be determined, right and wrong, law needs to be determined by what the majority say, and not what in the individual. You can disagree, but you don't have the right then to disagree in her view, because you have to go along with the majority.
Well, what's really interesting about what she does is she strikes at the very heart of our separation of powers. She strikes at the very heart. The people elect the legislature, and the people elect the executive office, the executive branch. The executive branch chooses who are going to be the black robe rulers, who are then ratified by the people who elected. So the people's voice is heard in every single facet. So the whole idea that black robe rulers are standing in the way of citizenship or of citizens in this case is fallacious, because the people's voice is heard at every single juncture. And really what she's saying...
No, that doesn't mean that there isn't such a thing as political judicial activism where they can go outside the law.
That isn't what's happening here.
That's not what you're arguing.
That's not what I'm arguing, and that's not what's happening here. What these so-called black robe rulers are saying is that the individual's voice is far greater, and their right to be able to say what they want to say is far greater than that of the state. That's exactly what... Yes. That's
the
exactly
individual, not the citizen. Not just citizen. It human. She made it a legal status.
That's exactly right. And if it's a legal status, it can be taken away.
Exactly, because that's her verbiage is very different. See, again, back to the major pin. The free and independent individual cannot be enslaved to force to say something. She's saying the First Amendment is to protect the citizen, which is a voting unit, the voice of the citizenry, essentially. So she's saying your legal status, you talk about, non-legal status, she's trying to alienate the non-citizen.
She's saying that nobody has really...
She's saying nobody. Ultimately, that's what she's saying. The individual human being doesn't have a right. The right is only there to protect the citizen who was voted, and then the majority of the citizenry determines what the individual has then the right to do. That's what she's arguing. And that's that's the complete danger of this. And for anybody who doesn't understand this idea of unionized labor and why this is so damaging, is because essentially what happens in that process is, and this is why it's different, private unions are different than public unions. So if we're stick with the teachers union, I mean, there's many kinds. There's teachers unions, there's police, there's firemen, there's certain
air traffic
controllers. There's certain worker unions depending on their field and what they're involved in that are run by the state. So these ones, just stick with teachers because that's easy for everyone to understand, and they're in every state. So if I think of teachers union, they work for the school. The school is run by the state. So if we negotiate a contract for the teachers union, it's a union that represents that collection of teachers employed by the state, but they're also negotiating with the state. And who do they negotiate with? The people elected into office.
Who they take their money and put in the office.
Money given by the unions. It's the unions who are a state institution, one state entity, giving money to another state entity to determine what any individual must do to conform to whatever that state has determined is the right practice. So it's not a fair negotiation.
It's two people. It's like this. It's two people. Imagine going to court and two people who already fundamentally agree with each other, negotiating with each other across the table. It's only a semblance of negotiating because the one side who puts you in the seat to negotiate has already, axiomatically, already won the debate. It's just a matter of,
because they're both really on the same side.
They're both on the same side, and the individual.
They both have the interest of the state.
Well, the teachers union
is still the interest of the state,
which is the state. But and the whole thing that we want to happen with this law is two things. We want the state to negotiate with the with teachers.
Yes, as a separate group. I don't
because
want to oppose the teachers having a union.
Right, I'm not either. The state represents the rest of us.
Yeah.
And the teachers union represent their party, their faction.
It should just be private, not
right.
public.
So we want the state, who represents all of us, not secretly representing the teachers union
as well.
The union as well, so that when the state sits down at the table, they're taking in to consideration those people who put them in the seat, not these people, so that it's a fair
I'll give another highly controversial example and an unpopular opinion in many circles, but I think it helps make the point very well. This is what I've argued for many, many years. When we talk about the idea of Obamacare or state-run, one payer system, sure. State-run healthcare. I'll tell people, you can talk about all the things and all the examples of where I oppose it for one reason. And here's my main reason. I mean, there's others, but my most significant reason that I oppose any form of state-run healthcare is that I lose the right to be protected from the state.
Right.
Here's the example. If I go right now on a private insurer, so Blue Cross Blue Shield, whoever it is, whatever insurer, I'll just pick them because they're big. So you take Blue Cross and Blue Shield, a private insurance company. If Blue Cross and Blue Shield refuses to give me coverage that I think I have paid for, or I have the right to,
you have the right to redress.
How do I redress that grievance? How do I fight this multi-billion dollar, as an individual? How do I fight this multi-billion dollar corporation? How do I get help?
You get a lawyer and you go to court.
I go to court. What is the court represents what?
They represent the state.
The state. So my redress against the oppression, let's call it oppression, whatever, let's just use a big word.
Right.
I'll use this, grievance, this oppressive decision by Blue Cross. I'm not going to give you your cancer medication. I'm not going to do whatever. So I take Blue Cross and Blue, a powerful billion-dollar company, and I go to the power of the state and I say, I need you, state, through the courts, I need you to intervene on my behalf because I'm not powerful enough as an individual
to compel these people to do their job.
them to do what is right.
Right.
So I go to a court and I get a judge who is hired by the state, representing the state, and he adjudicates and says, wow, big powerful corporation, you owe this individual
because you signed the contract.
You have to give them what is their due, and it may be financially problematic for you, but you don't have the right to keep them from something that they have the right to. So the state then is able to intervene on my behalf and protect me, the individual, from a powerful, big entity like Blue Cross and Blue Shield. Now, what happens if the government takes over and becomes my insurer? What happens?
There's no redress against the government.
Who do I go to help me? Who is my redress for my grievance? Because what I am then doing is saying, hey, government agency, you owe me this cancer treatment. And they say no. So I go to the other government agency and say, hey, tell that other government, but they're both the power of the state. They may be different branches, but they're both power of the state. So I'm going to one state entity to give me redress against another state entity, but both are representing the same power, the same thing. So I have no right then. I have no power to protect my rights.
There's no independent arbiter to choose between me and this person. It's just an arbiter who's already on one side of the ledger.
With state-run healthcare, I lose my rights long term. In the short term, people, it's perfect, it'll wonderful, it'll give you better stuff. That's not what happens when the state controls everything. That's the genius of having, in a fascist government, it's the government loosely controlling. There is no such thing as a private entity.
No, the government. People are allowed to run it. The government benefits from them running it.
We need to have independent private corporations, even powerful ones. But they also need to be balanced by the power of the state, because otherwise an individual gets lost. And so that's why this case, for the unions, the state-run, it's the same principle at play. You can't have two state entities, giving, arbitration or weighing grievances to the individual.
Especially if you're on the outside of this little discussion that they're having, you can say all day long that I'm going to benefit. And it may be the fact that I'm going to get a vacation, I'm going to get sick days. I'm going to get a raise and pay. That's all great. But if you're asking me to take all these things and at the same time lose my ability or freedom to be able to of dissent, to say no, to say
little William Wallace there,
but my ability to dissent and say no, not this. I mean, that's a heck of a trade.
Yeah,
that's a heck of a trade off. I don't know that I would make that decision.
Yeah,
and the people have a right to have a union. You just do not have a right to my money. And the great thing about this, just look at Wisconsin in Act 10. When Wisconsin instituted this law locally, the unions lost its power because people were saying, we don't need the unions. And I'm not anti-union. I mean, come on. Look at the history of unions.
I think private unions saw the place. Historically, they had a powerful place in protecting individuals from death,
slave, child labor, all these things. Unions have served the country absolutely
and
well.
They still probably can.
And they can. But
privately.
But what we're looking at is a union that is beholden to nobody but their own interest, who are actively working against the individual workers' ability to say, you know what, no.
And that's, again, you use the word individual, and we have to remember that they're working against the individual, but they don't see them as individuals. Like Kagan here. This is why this is a worldview issue that we, I'm glad we're getting into today, because it's more than just the politics of it. It's more than just the legalities of it, which all those are important factors.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, because read this case, that's the difference. Is one is saying that the majority opinion is saying the rights are there to protect the individual. That's talking about personhood, humanity, the essence of dignity, the human sacredness is enshrined in the individual. That's a very Judeo-Christian worldview that says the individual is the container of rights and values. They possess those things because they're created
and cannot be
with sacred worth.
It cannot be compelled to do things that. And this is the point. One says state over individual, and the other one says individual over the state. If it's state over the individual, then the state gets to tell you what you can do with your kids. They can tell you when you have kids. They can tell you whether your kids need to go and become a gymnast, or whether they need to become a carpenter, whether they need to become a doctor, or whether they need to be a soldier. The state is the thing that everything is, and its lasting is where everything is ordered toward.
Which they do loosely now to some degree, because the state pay Harvard Medical not to limit how many medical students they take.
That's right.
So Harvard says, we could take 400 students, but the state says, no, we have too many doctors, so we're only going to allow you to take 100, and we'll pay you. So the state will pay Harvard for all those empty spots. That's how. I don't know.
That's insane.
That.
I didn't know that.
That's actually done.
I know that. I mean, they pay farmers not to grow.
Yeah, they pay.
To grow crops.
But they do that in education.
Right.
So
I didn't know that.
You can't act, even if you want to become that. You say, well, I want to become a doctor and compete. I think I can be a better doctor than the other 100 guys or gals you let in. They said the state has paid us to fill those spots, not to educate. Which, by the way, is a great gig if you can get it. I will put my hat in the ring. I will gladly not educate any doctors, medical doctors, this year if the state would pay me.
Yeah, I'll do that from my chair downstairs.
I will gladly not educate people to become neurosurgeons, and I think that's a great gig if you can get it. But that's a whole other thing.
Crazy.
But the state does that now. They do determine what you can become. Very loosely, though. I mean, because it's not as obvious.
It's not as obvious as it,
But it is done.
It's pretty simple.
And that's very challenging because, again, this majority opinion says by compelling an individual, I think this is fascinating, to use the word demeaning. It demeans the individual to be forced to speak, even more than forced into silence, to speak. But Kagan doesn't see it that way. She thinks that the power of free speech is only for the collective.
Right.
The voice of the collective, the citizen. So she actually, in her view, people talk about immigrants' rights and all this border things and all the drama that goes on with that. But if you think Kagan is right, you are actually diminishing what you say is the value of the individual and the dignity of humanity. If you're there's no laws against being a human and open borders and it's demeaning and undignified to put people in jail. If that's your view, you should disagree with Kagan. Right. Because Kagan here is saying not the individual has a right, but the citizen
The state has a right to separate you from your families. The state has a right to separate you from your children. The state has a right to determine your value and worth.
That's what the fundamental underpinnings of her argument is, that very thing.
Sure.
The rights belong to the state.
What do you say to those people? Because I know a gentleman who's... How much time do we have?
We have about 10 minutes left.
I know a gentleman who would argue that the scriptures are largely written for a collective. In other words, there's this idea within the scriptures that we're all a body or a group, and that is where our real value lies. And we've all been poisoned by this Western pursuit of the individual and individualism and rugged individualism. We've all been poisoned by that particular view.
Okay, so I would say this. The idea of rugged individualism is a Western concept to some degree. I think it's a distortion of biblical individualism as we would know it, and I can outline here. So, because rugged individualism is a specific phrase, the idea that everybody is sort of an island unto himself. You pull yourself up by your bootstraps. There's no sense of community.
That's not.
And rugged individualism is a destructive value system, I think. So that's different, though. Biblical individualism is very different. I think you can trace it back to not just the idea of in Genesis where God created, male and female, created us, and individuals are created in the image of God. You see that played out even in the call of Abraham in Genesis 12 and 15, where through all you, all nations will be blessed. But it goes beyond ethnic identity. When Israel was enslaved in Egypt and they leave, finally freed by Moses.
Exodus.
Or in Exodus, I'm sorry. Yeah, in Exodus, when they leave from their enslavement, it's interesting because what it says is that not just the Hebrews went out, not just those who were physical, biological descendants. Right. It says a mixed group went out.
That's exactly right.
So any Egyptian who at that point wanted to go
could go.
Was then became a part of what became the nation of Israel. So Israel, even in the Old Testament, was never a purely ethnic identity, purely biological identity of physical seed of Abraham. So latent within all
prime example is Caleb the Kenizzite.
Yeah, you can find a million examples. Right. I mean, throughout the Old Testament, where it was never about biological descendancy.
Rahab.
Yeah, there are people in the line of Jesus who were not biologically, ethnically
his great-grandmother,
Hebrew.
Well, his great-great-great-grandmother, whatever she was.
Great-great, a bunch of greats.
But a bunch of greats in between.
How many greats?
However many greats. She is a total Moabite.
So Jesus, who was, technically ethnically Jewish, yes, but he was a mixed race dude in that sense. Yeah. Because he had Moabite blood in him. He had non-Hebrew blood in his lineage. Sure. So
that's hard to believe, I know, but it's true.
And you look at Paul's statement, which is often abused. There's neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female. His point is that the individual has been given their full place of ascendancy in God's kingdom. You don't have to go through a priest. Right. You don't need a mediator between us and God. We go directly through Christ. So every individual is made equal at the foot of the cross. And so our rights and our values and our dignity, which was there from creation, there throughout the Old Testament, is affirmed ultimately in the death and resurrection of Christ, and what Paul tells us is our place in his kingdom. So, yes, that is what is enshrined. Although I will say, I don't believe that America, and this is beyond this time here, I don't believe we're a Christian nation. I think that's a misused phrase, and it's not correct to say we're
a nation that has benefited from and living on the vestiges of Christianity.
Yes, we are a nation that is a secular nation from its founding, but rooted in a Judeo-Christian worldview framework and biblical principle and values.
Sure.
So you can't deny the Christian heritage that has shaped the Constitution and other founding and many of the founders. But we were never meant to be a Christian in the sense of you have to be Christian to receive those rights. Right. Because it's inherently what the founding documents say is that every individual, regardless of your religion, identity, race, even though it wasn't fully, lived out in those early days or even now, but the documents themselves point to a higher value for the value of individuals
Mm-hmm.
beyond the state. The state is not the guarantor of rights. The rights are given to us by a creator.
That's right.
By a God, which is not Christian.
Not
It's
according
just
to Kagan,
theistic. That's a theistic worldview, not a
Right.
Christian worldview. So it's a very theistic concept to say that there's a God who gave us rights. So we're created with these inherent rights. That is the worldview that is being undermined by the Kagans of the world, who say, no, there's no such thing as the individual having rights. The rights are for the citizen who is part of a collective, and the rights are there to protect the state, not the individual.
Right.
And that is a huge problem.
And it's very interesting if the individual is invested with these rights, then it's the individual that matters. It isn't like we stand, by ourselves. Again, we talked about people coming together to enshrine those rights by being together and choosing to be together and choosing to throw in with each other, so to speak, and saying what happens to you, it matters to me. This is the whole point of we're getting the racism in our country. The whole point, my problem with this whole thing is, as citizens, we say we throw in with each other. What happens to you matters to me. Yeah. Even if you live in Alabama or New Jersey, it matters to me, because we're citizens in the same country, and in that sense, we're a collective. We're people in a country.
Yeah.
But just because we're a collective doesn't mean that my voice is drowned out or your voice is drowned out, and your suffering is drowned out either. That's why we go to court, and we elect leaders who will look at us as individuals.
Yeah.
And see us as such, and then enact laws that benefit us.
The individual becomes the foundation upon which groups are established,
right?
And groups have value as they generate community and relationship.
Sure.
But it begins with the essence of the individual. It's the Christian theologian, poet John Donne, his famous poem "For Whom the Bell Tolls."
John Donne. Oh, is that how you pronounce his name? I always thought it was John Donne.
Maybe it is.
I don't know, but I mean, I thought it was just a rhyme, rhyme together. John Donne.
I don't know.
John Donne, that's pretty awesome.
I think it's Donne. I don't know. Maybe he's British. What do I know?
Well,
it's John Donne. I don't know. John Donne.
Who cares?
So, I mean, he's like, he's talking about, looking at this idea of death. When one person dies, it affects the whole. It affects the main. It doesn't just impact the individual. It's when he says, for whom does the bell toll? It tolls for thee. Just because it's marking somebody else's death when the chapel is ringing the bell for the funeral, it's marking something in you that has died. So that's why every life has value. So you can take the most hardened criminal, and you can say they were, executed on death row. It is still a sad day.
Yeah.
That's my view of it. It's not a day of celebration.
It's very interesting
because life has been taken and life has value. It's
very interesting that you say it that way, because we have a tendency to become hardened in our country and to be a vengeance oriented people.
Look at this last week, the politics of destruction. I mean, I don't want to get a sidetrack because we're out of time, but yeah,
to be a vengeance oriented people.
We are.
And let me say, to let the things that we see on television totally discourage us. And I would say if we can be discouraged if we discount the fact that God is behind the scenes orchestrating these things to his own good pleasure. I mean, and even today, who would have thunk? I mean, as a person who's fought for the country and been in the Marine Corps and I love America with all of its faults and all of its bad history. I love this country. I just have today as a reminder. You always have to remember that God is behind the scenes orchestrating the events. Some of these cases that were decided were landmark cases. I mean, why should pregnancy resources have to tell people about abortion? That's not what they're there for.
Again, if the state has authority and more rights than the individual, that's the same issue,
right?
Really.
The same deal. Why should a person who doesn't support a union's particular politics, why should they be compelled? Isn't the very fact that they get to take their money elsewhere a compelling reason for the unions to listen to them? It absolutely is. Or take their money away so that the unions will listen to them. Why should Why should we be compelled to do things that we don't want to within the law? Obviously, within the law, there's always a structure that we want to stay within. We shouldn't be compelled to do that. We should have the right to say no.
So I just thought of it,
Peace de la resistance.
Because I saw times, and I was thinking about the show and where theming, because we talked about even the Christian side, where they're trying to say only certain voices count. If they're black voices, you have to say the right thing, and we talked about that, and all these ideas of disembodying the individual from their value, making them only part of the group. It's like the hashtags, Black Lives Matter. I'm thinking that we need to have a new hashtag. Maybe that'll be on the show. It's like hashtag Black Voices Matter.
That's right. All black voices matter.
All black voices matter.
All black voices, not black voices matter.
Yeah.
All.
That's true.
That's right.
Because this is.
And then they'll say, well, not everybody's black. Oh my gosh, stop it.
Exactly, and exactly that's the problem, is because identity is not defined by the group. It's an individual.
Sure.
Identity is given. Now, identity can be lent to a group and establish a group based on shared interests or values and context, but identity remains with the individual. And I think as we close up, we have to recognize that this worldview is at play, and this is really what's under attack in all of these things. And as Christians, we've got to be very careful
about which ones we intone.
We just don't let politics determine how we view the world. We don't let a political party do it.
Sure.
Nor that we let a particular group within it, whether it's trying to curry favor with a group, change our worldview, which is unique, because without it, we lose the power of recognizing the beauty of and the sacredness of every human being. Mm-hmm. And if we lose that as the Christian and that unique voice that we bring,
where is it going to come from?
We're going to be it's not going to come from anywhere.
It's not going to come from anywhere else.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so I think today was good. Without 2 weeks in a row without Ward Crocker.
Hey, listen, a day without Ward Crocker is second only to the day we get to go to heaven.
He's quickly replacing Corey Marsh as our evil foil for this show, because he hasn't shown up twice a week. Oh, I'm too busy.
And just so you guys know, Ward is teaching doctor of ministry candidates these last 2 weeks.
Yeah,
he's really busy. Not that we care.
He's our third. In case you're first time on the show, we have only three of us here, and he's not here today, so we get to pick on him because he's not here. So
and you know what? We didn't say anything bad about Corey, so let's end on that. Corey,
you close on it.
We don't miss you, Corey. I asked you to come today, and you acted like you didn't want to come again.
He never wants to come. We invite him on. I just we're not inviting him anymore.
Corey's just the bad guy. When you look up the dictionary, I don't mean literally bad, but I mean for all intent and purposes in our argument, the bad guy.
Hey, real quick too. Next week is 4th of July is on a Wednesday, right? Isn't that the 4th?
Right.
So I think we're going to do our show on Thursday next week.
I think that's a winner.
So probably next week, next Thursday, we'll be back, and hopefully you guys join us off the cuff.
All righty. And no Ward Crocker.